Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Rainbow Sketchbook series. My name is Morgan, and we're going back to the 90s with some Tamagotchi-inspired art. Today, I'm working with a very thin piece of white paper, with some neat gray spots in it. Originally, I thought about making an abstract frog pattern, since the spring peepers are out and they always make me excited for the new year. However, I want the subtle pattern of this paper to show through, so I'm opting to do a frog-themed item instead. Suddenly, the idea of a frog Tamagotchi pops into my head, and I do some research before I start sketching. I saw quite a few frog cases, so I want to try out a lily pad case first. The idea of the Frogagotchi sitting on a lily pad is too cute to pass up. To really turn up that 90s feel, I add a phone charm strap. The background feels a bit bare, so I play around with adding more lily pads in the background. This piece I want to be playful and fun. Taking a look at this sketch, I see that there isn't much room for the screen. I like the idea of the lily pad, but in practice, it just cuts into the screen far too much. While the frog case is a more generic choice, the center being larger and open gives space for a frog friend to live. I thought about adding a frog shape to the background too, but it makes the background too busy for my liking. Since this idea is so simple, I want to include some more details such as how the plastic is inset and not just one solid piece. I'm experimenting a bit with how I want the frog to look. I try out a pixelated look, but since it will be so small on the screen, I decide that a smooth design will work better. I give the frog a silly face, since a lot of Tamagotchis have pretty wacky designs. I start out with giving the frog some typical frog legs, but they don't fit the vibe. I work out how to make it more Tamagotchi-esque by adding stubby legs instead. I add some spots to the head and give it some nostrils to give a little more personality. Next, I do some quick color studies, since all I'm really doing is looking for what colors I want to pair with green, since, frog. I have a really pretty mulberry Prismacolor that I love using in everything, so of course it is the first choice. I thought a sky blue would go well with it and green, but it does in fact not. Dark green gets a quick try, but I end up going with a pink. I experiment with adding a pink grid in the background because it still feels like it needs something more. It's time for us to start working on the final piece in the sketchbook. I put the main circle for the case in the center of the page. This would be great, but I forgot about the eyes, attachment loop, and phone charms, so the case is off-center on the page. I accidentally make a tangent with the eye on the right and the phone charm, so I do my best to get rid of it. I try to make the blocks more interesting by drawing them at various angles. I get a little ahead of myself and add the buttons before I inset the plastic, so I go back and do that. Inside of the screen, I make the lily pad more 3D than it was in the sketch, so it appears to be sitting in the water. Our little froggy friend goes on top without any hiccups. I just now noticed the negative space at the bottom, so I'm going to add a couple more charms below the case. The new charms are a lily pad and lotus. I was going to add one on the right side of the piece, but realized that it's already too heavy with other elements. Now I'm planning out the grid for the background, and immediately make a tangent with the eye on the left. Whoops! To avoid that on my second attempt, I just draw a line straight through the eye. A couple of the smaller elements have tangents, but since they are far away from the areas of highest interest, it's okay. Finally, I'm adding the accent lily pads at random points on the grid, so that it appears random, but isn't messy. I dig out my Posca pens and start coloring in the case, so it has a bit of that plasticky feel to it. I'm going to do the screen with colored pencil so that it has that soft, non-backlit screen of the 90s. I use a lighter green Posca on the inside and a darker green one on the outside, just so that there is more visual interest. I put down the purple for the buttons, and then realized that maybe I should have put the green down first. I was concerned that the colors would mix though, and I don't want to go over this paper too much, since it's so thin that it could mill up easily. I was probably also worried about losing my sketch in the position of the buttons under thick paint. I go rogue and try out blush on the case. I'm not feeling the placement of it initially, and since the paint is thin, the color is pretty gross too. Since I'm waiting on things to dry and to figure out if I'm keeping the blush or not, I start adding the grid in the background. Unfortunately, I'm not paying enough attention, and I add some dark lines through where I plan to put my lily pads later. Afterwards, I go to fill in the charms, but realize I erased too much of the blocks earlier, so I have to go back in and redraw them. I color in the charms, but don't know what I want to do yet with the bottom ones. Since they weren't in my sketch, I didn't do any color prep for them. I go ahead and color them in pink because there's too much green to add more of it to the piece. Satisfied with the charms at the moment, I think some more on how I want to handle the blush. While I think the sideways blush is cute, it doesn't make sense in the context of the case being hard pieces of plastic. Considering this, I decide to draw the blush vertically and within the confines of the light green plastic. Waiting on the body to dry after various touch-ups, I add the highlights to the eyes. I do some more touch-ups, trying to get these colors as opaque as possible, and move on to the string and clasp for the charms. I didn't do color prep for the clasp either, so I start off making it silver since most of them are a silver. But it doesn't fit the vibe of the rest of the piece and introduces a new color way too late in this process. I have to let it dry before I can fix it though, so I go back to the charms on the bottom. I decide that white would work best for the inner color of the lotus, since it would blend into the lily pad charm if I use purple. I add the lily pads in the background, while once again playing the wait on everything to dry game. They conveniently work for practicing how I want to layer color inside of the screen too. For the last step with Posca, I make the clasp pink to make it look like plastic and fit with the rest of the piece, while breaking up the heaviness of the dark green. I go back to building up the lily pads in the background. Everything so far is cool in color and blending together, so I know I need to add some warmth to get some variation. Using what I've learned from the lily pads in the background, I'm starting on the one in the screen. I know overall I want it to be fairly dark so that it looks like the frog is sitting on it. I add some water and blend it with the lily pad. The overall piece is still pretty cool, so wanting the frog to stand out, I'm using the warm green that I used earlier for the lily pads in the background. To keep the frog from being flat, I grab a dark purple to push the back legs back and separate it from the lily pad. I use this same dark purple to establish the shadows in the rest of the screen to create cohesion. The water feels a little boring to me, so I shift the hue in a few spots. The piece has an instant mood boost because of this and quits feeling so dreary. I faintly add in the sky to suggest mist. I feel like the frog and lily pad are getting a bit lost, so I add more shadows to them. The frog looks like he's floating around in nothing, so I throw some lily pads and shrubbery in the background to make an environment. I use the mulberry color I picked out earlier for the frog's mouth to bring in the purples from the rest of the piece. I then use the same color to add some values on the case and create textures. This really helps me show that the plastic is inset, since I couldn't really do that with just the Poscas alone. The mulberry is too close in value to the dark purple to be highlights, so I'm going back over them with a lilac color. I I use a light salmon color to highlight the pink, giving it a little more warmth than just a light pink would have. I do the same process for the greens, creating insets, shadows, and highlights. After some finishing touches with a dark green and purple, I erase all the excess pencil lines to clean everything up. To wrap things up, I go in with the white Sakura Jelly Roll pen to create poppy highlights. I go over these highlights with colored pencil to dim them and not have stark white highlights all over the place. I go back into the grid and fill in the squares since it feels a little boring. For a couple of the squares, I use the mulberry color for more interest. And with that, I'm done. I hope you enjoyed watching this come together. Let me know what your favorite part is, or if there's anything you would have done differently. As always, you can find me over on my Ko-fi between videos, where I have my shop and monthly rewards. My goal for this month is to have 10 members, so I hope to see some of you there. Until next time, take care.